Hi, and welcome to our second blog. Cowardice Does Not Pay, and we're trying to tie together. We just left the Zarathustra and Nietzsche before, and we're moving on to someone who's helping us to now understand. We've challenged all these things. We've done all the hard work of uh, understanding Nietzsche's point of view, and now we're stuck with this ambiguous existence, and we need some help. So I start with a quote from really the the most prominent author and thought leader in embracing ambiguity, Simone de Beauvoir. Listen to this quote. At the present time, there still exist many doctrines which choose to leave in the shadow certain troubling aspects of a too complex situation. But their attempt to lie to us is in vain. Cowardice doesn't pay. Those reasonable metaphysics, those consoling ethics with which they entice us, only accentuate the disorder from which we suffer. So I shared that because those really are harsh words for people who have tried to say this is how it is or that's the way this is. This world is ambiguous, and the sooner we get to it, the better off we'll be. So this blog is the follow-up, or perhaps a therapy from our first blog on transforming from Nietzsche's camel to the lion to the child. In this discussion, we're going to try and embrace the unbraceable. We're grasping that which, by definition, we cannot grasp: ambiguity. And before we get started, if you haven't begun your journey into educational existential crisis, then perhaps you can explain how that possibly happened, because, man, you are way up higher on that pyramid than I am. You slayed the thou shalts, and you attacked that dragon, you unburdened your camel, and now, boy, you just own it. So good for you, and hopefully you are willing the freedom of others out there and sharing how you did that with lots of other people. If you have not and you still need some help with that, then let's stay in this conversation. So this discussion on the ambiguity begins with Simone de Beauvoir and her amazing work in the ethics of ambiguity. By all means, take a look at this. I attached the quick Google Books search on that one in case you want to read some more about it. But if you want the digested version, I need to take you to the world's best digester and resharer of philosophy, Stephen West. And I'd ask you that you listen to the Ethics of Ambiguity podcast here, and then come back to us. Steve and I introduced me to Simone de Beauvoir. Stephen West is, in my opinion, the best at describing these things and making them real for you. And I have not been the same since I heard this first podcast, because even when I studied philosophy, I didn't get to Simone de Beauvoir, which is quite sad, but I didn't. And it would have changed my understanding of the world, and it has. So to Stephen, I thank you for that, and hopefully you get something out of this when you listen to it as well. So I'm going to assume right now that you have just listened to that podcast, and let's sum it up. I have to believe that right now the barbarians of ambiguity are now smashing down the gates of your city that you have built around you, and this city is built on some kind of mythology that you've adopted for simplicity and utility and moving forward. So the gates are crashing down, and you've got to struggle with the fact that things are never going to be the same again. So we need to find some way of moving forward. And even if you have rebuilt your city, rebuilt those gates with a new mythology or different understanding, we still need to figure out how to embrace this ambiguity, because it's coming back to get us. So are we going to skip over a lot of this work and let's skip over some of this work and get right to the point of Simone de Beauvoir? Let's talk about willing the freedom of others. To do that, though, we have to understand why we have to will freedom at all, and are you free? We're condemned to this whole idea of freedom. We're told by Simone de Beauvoir that of all things, we are free to make choices all around us. And you see, the issue is that we're all subjects. That is, when I say subjects, we're creating our own way in this world with objects all around us. But we are, at the same time, object in other people's subjectivity. Right, so if you're a subject, and you have objects that you use around you, people, that you say, this person does this for me and that does that for me, then technically this makes sense, right? Because if we're subjects with people and who are objects around us, then we must in turn be an object of someone else's subjectivity, right? So you think you're reading this great novel about yourself, and there are different characters in your book. Those are the objects. And then you look at someone else who's writing their book, and in turn, you must be their subject, their object. They are the subject, you're the object. So now when you sense this object-subject duality, you should start to get a little dizzy and start asking yourself if you were just playing a part in someone else's story. If you do accept that you are, and that you become someone else's object in their subjectivity, then at this point, historically, just historically speaking, you're going to want to rebel a little bit. You don't want to be someone else's object. You're going to push back. You're going to make your subjectivity more known to that person of the group who seems to be putting that upon you. And there's a name for this, making you an object in someone else's subjectivity. It's called oppression. Repression, I'll even accept. You're being repressed. You're being oppressed. That's right. The definition of oppression is a person or group imposing their subjectivity upon you to make you an unwilling object in that process. People who sense they are objects will either submit to this and give up, or they will make their subjectivity clear. History has shown us that when people are oppressed, they will rise up. And if we accept that oppression is being someone else's object, because they're willing their own freedom but not thinking of others, there will be some war. The reason this topic has changed me so much personally is that we can take this philosophy and we turn it into immediate action. That's not always true in philosophy. At least we can spot those places where those who have been made objects in someone's subjectivity, we can see it. We can spot it more quickly. Then we can work to free those people from that oppression. To put this plainly, and I'm sorry if that word oppression is throwing you off, choose another one if you'd like. To put this plainly, if you expect to be free, to will your own subjectivity in this world, then you must be working every day to will the freedom of others. Because if you are free to act, then someone before you paved that way. Somebody willed your freedom. You didn't do this on your own. It's just not possible. So now let's turn this to education. Can you think of a place where a kid, let's say let's just take a spot, between the ages of 5 and 18, and just for the heck of it, can you think of a place where someone in that age bracket might feel like some object of someone's preconceived subjectivity? Perhaps. And now think of a moment when that person, that kid between the ages of 5 and 18, senses this oppression, and they no longer really subject themselves to it, and they begin to exert their subjectivity, right? That they say, hey, sit in these rows and do some stuff, and then when you go home, do that stuff again. Let me know what you think of that. And they say, I think not much of it. Some will grab a hold of it, and we'll talk about them later. And so I can even make this more personal for you, right? Can you see? I mean, you can see how there might be some pushback, really, from that student, sure. And my guess is that you've always wanted to be a great teacher, right? If you're in education, that's what you've wanted, or a great manager or leader of anyone. Someone who, you want to be someone who inspires kids to do other great things, right? This feels like a journey that you've taken upon yourself, and to guide your own ship, you want to be a great teacher, and that's who you should be. I agree. But think about this. That classroom you're thinking of leading, that's got to have students in it. And they've got to agree that what you've done is good. You don't get to just decide that what you're doing is great. And you need parents who are sending those kids to school. Now, luckily for you, law mandates that those kids have to be here, and they're forced to, so they're oppressed no matter what. So this is a strange system we got set up. Someone is making this happen, but you cannot alone reach that level of great teacher, that goal that you've set for yourself, without willing the freedom of those around you. You can tell yourself you've done it if you oppress them just enough. And so now it's on you. You got to will the freedom of these kids in a way that they may act in a way that you two are heading to the same goal, right? Great learning. Not as easy as that sounds. It sounds kind of ambiguous, right? They're kind of willing you're willing their freedom, they're willing their freedom, but they can't do it in certain ways, and because there are rules around it, well, we're going to have to navigate these waters, and it's not going to be simple. In education, we find some interesting types that have found their way through this. The navigation looks like this. One, those who double down on the impression and say, there are rules, follow the rules, and we'll get this done. Execute what I tell you to execute, and then that's it. That is the lowest level right there. It really is. They have adopted the fact that they've accepted the fact that someone says this is the way it should be, and that other people behind us to get in line behind me because I did it this way. That is our subman. That's actually going to be in general the vast majority of people out there. But we're not the vast majority in this situation, are we? Then there are those adventurers who choose to ignore all the rules and just wander. Those people get a little bit of pushback from the teachers around them because they're not following any rules. But there's a third option out there, and consider this. We can challenge those structures around us and determine whether we are inhibiting or willing the freedom of others in every aspect. Are we inhibiting? Are we oppressing? Or are we willing the freedom? Are they choosing how they learn? Are they choosing how they demonstrate learning? Right? That's where creativity comes into play. We know that if we want students to be good problem solvers, then we have to get them to embrace this ambiguity. We've moved students into an educational setting right now where there are tests given at certain grades, and in those tests there are certain objectives. And even if we refuse to take those tests, as you're allowed to opt out now, the objectives all around them are built on executable tasks with very closed endings. Those objectives exist, and we can train our students to execute them. And we as teachers have been trained to execute those objectives. This is particularly true for the highest performing students, and this is our worst. Our highest performing students have learned to play the game of regurgitating better than anyone else. This doesn't mean that they're not creative or not great problem solvers, but it probably means that we either have or we are going to train it out of them in some way through this system. And if we don't act quickly, it's going to stay that way. So here's an experiment for you. Just take 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks in your lesson plan, and add questions or problems to which you do not have an answer. Are you a math teacher? Because you're really going to hate this. I find them to have the most problem with this. And here's a good start. Start with a Socratic seminar with a prompt like, what's been the most impactful innovation in history? Now, in this activity, you can't speak. Get them in the circle, but give them about 3 days or a week to lead up to this. Have them research it, look into it a little bit, and come back. And then during the class, I want you to chart how kids talk. And I want you to have them Socratically move through this discussion. And while they're speaking, consider how much at each moment you want to interject. And put a little check by that every time it happens. How much you want to guide the discussion based on what you know from your experience and your acquired knowledge. You are one of the experts in the room. You want to interject and change some misconception, things that are off. Circle those moments and think about, from that moment, just from that perspective, how teaching could change. That instead of you saying, this is what we're going to do today, execute this, do some homework about that, think about the fact that you just have a Socratic seminar where kids are debating something as ambiguous as the most impactful innovation in the world, and you found moments inside there where you could actually help them guide learning to actually construct learning out of that. I'm not asking that you give up those key learning concepts. One of the things when I talk to teachers about this is they feel like I'm saying, oh, great, so we're just going to abandon all the learning, all the key components of physics? No, not in any way, shape, or form. You keep that, because I know as a Spanish teacher, I was determined that all the accents in the preterite tense and making sure that distinction between the preterite and the imperfect in Spanish were essential. Without that, how can anybody learn to speak? I've learned that wasn't necessarily true, but I believed it at the time. And I believe that there are components that we have to have learning targets along the way. Just make sure that when the students express their knowledge, that knowledge that you are certain that they have to have, that it's contained within a problem that's being solved or an attempt to connect to material outside of your class. Because teaching in the silos that we do, if we believe that we have to will the freedom of these kids, we can't do it in silos. How do you will freedom of kids within a silo? It's not even possible. So I ask you to simply consider how well we do at the crucial task of willing the freedom of others and allowing students to be less of an object in narrow subjectivity. And as an administrator, if you're an administrator, how are you allowing the autonomy, the free will of the people who are willing the freedom of others? It keeps going on and on throughout the system. Somebody's got to start somewhere. And I ask that it be you. Look to help others be free, to will their freedom, and I think we'll see the payback. Thank you. And leave some comments below on what you think. Thanks. Bye.